Hi everyone, it's Marisa from bumblebeeapothecary.com, and today I am bringing you along for another day in my kitchen. Today I am preparing some freezer meals as I get ready to welcome our next baby. So as many of you know, we are getting ready to welcome our fifth baby pretty soon. So at the time of filming this, I am around 37 weeks pregnant, I believe. I filmed this before baby came, and then I'm doing the audio after. So I have to think back to how many weeks I was. I'm pretty sure it was 37. And so the first thing that I'm getting started here is just some nuts. So these are going to be the crispy nuts, like from the Nourishing Traditions cookbook, where you soak them in water and salt and then dry them. So I like to dry them in the oven. And I have almonds, pecans, and macadamia nuts. And I'm just putting those in some big mixing bowls, putting filtered water in there and salt, and then I'm going to let those sit. Later on, I'll drain them and put them in the oven on as low of a temperature as the oven will go, and just let them sit in there until they're completely dry. And I'm getting these ready just because I want to have a very easy to grab thing to be able to eat whenever I just need something to fill in, because I'm even going to start eating those now. I have been having these in the end of pregnancy and in the third trimester. Just making sure to be eating often enough is something that I have to kind of remind myself. And having something like this that's really easy to grab makes that a lot more doable. And then I know that once baby is here, things are going to be a little busy as we're adjusting. And with nursing, you're going to be hungry, and so I'm going to be wanting different easy things that I can just grab and eat in between meals whenever I need to. Another thing that I have to do every so often is feed my sourdough starter. So sometimes I'm in a big hurry and I pull it out and I use some of the sourdough starter, and then I don't feed it right away, which is not the best thing to do, but sometimes I'm in a hurry and it just happens. So earlier this morning I used this to make some pancakes, and now I am just getting around to feeding it. So it sat in there for a little bit, and then I knew that I would feed it again as soon as I could. So I'm going to do that. I like to use mostly spelt flour with a little bit of rye flour, filtered water, and then just mix that until it's that nice thick pancake batter type consistency, and then I'm putting that back into the refrigerator. The other thing that I'm making, which is a freezer type of a meal that's going to be good for breakfast, is some packages of soaked oatmeal. So this way the soaking process is already done ahead of time. I can have this thawing in the refrigerator, pull it out the morning of, and just have a really quick oatmeal that I can make. We'll probably eat it with some sausage as well. So to do that, I'm just putting the amount of oats that I want into some bags. Since heat is not involved, I'm okay with using a plastic bag. I know that plastic is not the most ideal, but in my research, and then also they talked about this when I was doing my Certified GAPS coach training, they said you have to balance things by making things usable and doable, and not being overwhelmed with trying to be too perfect about everything, because then things just don't happen. So they said, in their opinion, plastic was just fine to use when it's not being heated. So for example, freezing things in the freezer, it's okay to use some plastic bags, plastic containers. It's really where things are being heated or hot things are being exposed to plastic that gets to be dangerous. So in the interest of maintaining life balance and not getting too overwhelmed, I am using some plastic bags for these. I know that there are some alternatives. There are silicone things that you can use, and you'll see that when I make a different dish later on, I do use some silicone storage containers for the freezer for that. But yeah, we just moved. Things are crazy, and I'm just doing what works. And so I thought I would share that about heat really being the main concern with plastic. So yeah, I'm partway through. I'm changing to smaller bags, realizing that I don't have as many of the larger ones, and I'm going to need those for some other things. And this oatmeal is going to fit just fine in a smaller quart-sized bag, so I'm just switching that out. But anyway, to do this, I'm just putting the amount of oats that I want in there, and then I'm going to be soaking it in a mixture of water and kefir. And I'm adding a little bit of my mineral salt to each bag. I'm also adding some frozen blueberries to the bag, just to make it tasty and interesting. And then I'm adding my kefir and water mixture, so my liquid is twice the amount of oats that I have in there. And once that's in there, I seal it up, And then I'm going to let these sit in the refrigerator for several days before they go into the freezer. That way the kefir is more active and able to help with deactivating those anti-nutrients in the oats and all that good stuff that happens when we soak our grains ahead of time. And so putting those in the refrigerator for now, and then after a few days has gone by, I'm going to stick them in the freezer. Next thing that I'm getting ready to make is some breakfast quiche mixture that I'm going to have ready to go, and then all I'll have to do is just pour that into a glass baking dish and bake that for a really easy protein-rich breakfast. So to do this, I'm first cooking some breakfast sausage. So we have some natural pork sausage, so I'm going to cook those. And now at this point, the breakfast sausages are done cooking in the oven. I do them at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, and then I just pull them out and they're cooling on that pan on the stove back there. And then the next thing I'm doing is shredding up some raw cheddar cheese. And then now I'm going to get started cracking my eggs for the quiche mixture as well. So I'm pouring the mixture into bags as I do it. I am cutting up the sausage and adding those to each bag. I'm also adding a little bit of frozen spinach, a little splash of milk, some salt and pepper, and just doing that in each bag. And so that makes a really delicious breakfast quiche kind of mixture. And then to prepare this, I'll pull it out of the freezer, thaw it, and then just pour it into a pan and stick it in the oven at 375 degrees for about 45 minutes to an hour whenever it's completely cooked through and set. The next thing that I'm going to make to have on hand is some oxtail soup. So this is one of my favorite things to have whenever there's like a recovery, which having a baby definitely involves that. So it's so collagen rich. It's one of my favorite cuts for collagen in a really nice meat stock. And so I have my oxtail bones that I'm putting in there. I added some extra fat. You can either do tallow or lard. I did a little bit of lard this time. So I have those in my Dutch oven. I'm actually going to roast those in the oven at 350 degrees for 1 hour. And then when those are done roasting, I'm going to pull them out and then add the rest of the ingredients. So now my oxtail bones are done roasting in the oven, so I'm going to pull them out of the Dutch oven and they're going to just sit on a plate for a little bit while I add everything else. But before I add the vegetables, I do a little process where I work with the meat stock to just make it really, really flavorful. And to do that, after I take the bones out of the pot, I put it onto the stovetop and turn it to medium-high heat. And at that point, I add a half of a cup of dry wine. So my preference is dry white wine, but I'll use dry red wine, which is what I'm using today, and that still works great. And then I also add a cup of filtered water, a quarter cup of apple cider vinegar. And then I stir this on the stove, and I scrape up the bits on the bottom of the pan to just loosen them and help give it flavor. And I watch until the liquid comes to a boil, and then I continue to boil that until the liquid is reduced to about half. And then, like I said, scraping the bottom of the pan. And this recipe, the written recipe and the printable recipe card is on my website, bumblebeeapothecary.com, and I'll have a link to that in the description box below in case you'd like the written recipe. But continuing on, then I go ahead and I add the oxtails back to the pan. I cover them with water. I bring that to a boil, and then I watch for any scum to rise to the top, and if there is some, then I remove that with a skimmer. And then add the vegetables. So I'm doing onions, leeks, and carrots, and then season with salt and pepper to taste. And then I let that simmer for at least 6 to 8 hours. I have gone a little bit longer too, and it turns out really, really well. If you're uncomfortable with it simmering on the stovetop for that long, you can also do it in the oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which also works great. And then once it's done simmering, I remove it from the heat, and then since I'm freezing a lot of it, I'm going to let it cool completely before putting it into my freezer containers, and I'll show you that process. The next thing that I'm making is some meatballs. So these are really nice to have just as an easy dinner to be able to pull out. You can just pull them out frozen, pop them in the oven, and then bam, there you go. Your meatballs are cooking for dinner. And so this is something that I've done before and I really appreciated having it. So I'm going to do 3 dinners worth of meatballs. So I have a bunch of grass-fed ground beef here that I'm putting into a bowl. And I will say that I personally find it, you can let me know what you guys think, but I personally find it kind of hard to come up with freezer meal ideas that fit with a Nourishing Traditions, Wise Traditions, healthy way of eating, because lots of freezer meals have lots of tomato products and I don't want a ton of tomatoes in my diet with a newborn. I just noticed in the past that it kind of upsets them a little bit. And so there's different things I like to avoid just right when they're first brand new. And so freezer meals, for ideas for freezer meals that you come across online, oftentimes have a lot of those ingredients that I really would rather be avoiding. So some of my go-tos have been meatballs, some easy things for breakfasts, and then also soups work really well. So that's what I tend to go to. And then I also just know that in the back of my mind that there are other meals that we can easily pull from, that my husband can easily throw together and make or whatever. Like, for example, a roast, just sticking a roast into the oven with some carrots, onions, and potatoes. That's so easy. Like, basically it's the same amount of work as sticking a freezer meal into the oven. So those kind of things, just knowing that I have really easy, simple things that I can go to whenever I need to, and then having some good things in the freezer that are already prepared as well, like the meatballs and soups and some breakfast items. So to make the meatballs, a lot of you have seen how I make these before, but I just have my meat in a bowl. I add eggs, usually about an egg per pound of ground beef, and then season it with salt and pepper, some onion and garlic powder. I like to add parsley, and then I mix that all together and then form the meatballs. I have parchment paper onto some baking sheets and I'm going to let them freeze on. And then once they're frozen, I will put them into bags since that will fit in the freezer easier, and then they'll be good to go. Now at this point, my oxtail soup is done simmering. I've let it cool so it's not hot at all anymore. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and add it to my containers to store in the freezer. So for storing it, I have a couple different things that I like. I really like these silicone soup cubes, so you can get them in different sizes. This is a 1 cup size portion, and I find this really handy. I really like these because you could just pop out a serving at a time and heat it in a pan on the stove, so it makes it really easy. There's lids that fit over the top. But yeah, you can get them in different sizes too if you want a 2 cup portion or half a cup. You can use them for other things like freezing little portions of sauce or fresh herbs and oil, all kinds of different things. They're wonderful to have. And then I'm also filling up some quart freezer containers as well. And while we're talking about plastics and silicones and different things, this is something that they talked about in my GAPS coach training, where they talked about really making sure to not be so extreme that you can't even live your life. So for example, plastics are really a problem when they're heated, but if you're storing something cold in them and then freezing in them, they said it shouldn't be a problem. And it does make life a lot easier to be able to store in the freezer and not worry about glass breaking and all that kind of stuff. And so their official recommendation was plastic is okay for cold applications, since for batch cooking and things like that, because it does make things so much easier. So the silicone soup cube containers and then the quart containers are going in the freezer, and then what's left I'm storing in this 1/2 gallon glass jar, and I'm going to eat this right away over the next several days here. And then the frozen amounts will go in the freezer, and then I'll enjoy those after baby is here. At this point, my meatballs are frozen through too. I let them sit in the freezer until they're frozen solid, and then I'm going to go ahead and bag them up also. So what I did is I divided them evenly up across 3 different gallon freezer bags, so that way I knew that I had 3 different meal amounts, and then stuck those in the freezer and they were ready to go. And then at this point, my nuts are finished soaking, so I'm going to go ahead and drain the water from those and put them on a couple of baking sheets with parchment paper in the oven at the lowest temperature that it will go. I'm going to sprinkle some more mineral salt on them as well, and just let those sit in the oven until they're completely dry. I hope that you enjoyed coming along and seeing what kind of things I'm preparing and putting in the freezer as we're getting ready to welcome baby number 5. I would also love to know what you guys like to do when it comes to freezer meals. What recipes do you like to make and put in the freezer, and what are kind of your go-tos for preparing for a big life event or bringing a meal to somebody? I'd love to hear what you guys like to do, so be sure and share that in the comments. Also, check out that description box. I have the link to the oxtail soup recipe down there, like I mentioned. I also have other things like meal plans, some free ebooks, and other goodies that I've made for you guys, so be sure and check those out. I also have links to things like our under-counter water filter and other things that we really like to use. If you did like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with anybody else who you think would enjoy it or find it helpful, and if you're new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. I get out new videos every week on nourishing recipes and natural living. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.